The candles had burned halfway down by the time I realized they weren't coming. The roast I had slow cooked for 8 hours was cold, untouched. My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone again. No new messages. Not even a lie to soothe me. I had ironed the linen napkins that morning, folded them like I always did when they were children, little swans for each plate. Now they looked like wilted birds around a feast made for ghosts. That's when I saw it. My daughter's Facebook post, a group photo, every face familiar, all of them smiling, around another table, a different house. My son, his wife, my sister, my grandchildren, even the neighbor who once borrowed sugar from me without asking. I stared at it for a long time. Then I dropped my phone. It hit the floor with a thud, and I followed it, knees giving out as if my body just couldn't lie to itself anymore. They hadn't forgotten. They had planned around me. The tears came fast, thick, angry. I tried to hold them back, but they spilled into my mouth, hot and bitter. For a moment, I thought I was going to throw up. I had never cried like that. Not even when I buried their father, because then I still had them. Tonight, it felt like even he was gone. Let me know where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story speaks to you, share your thoughts below. Don't skip, because what happens at the end will surprise you more than the betrayal itself. It started that morning with hope. I wore the red sweater they'd bought me 3 years ago. I curled my hair. I set the table early, just in case they came sooner than expected. Every fork aligned, every glass polished. The house smelled like cinnamon and rosemary, and something deep in my bones that whispered family. I even lit the fireplace, which I hadn't done in years. Something about the crackling helped me believe. At 5:00 p.m., I got the first text from my eldest, Rachel. "Running late, Mom. Save us a plate." At 5:30, I got one from James. "We're just wrapping something up. Be there soon." But 6:00 came, then 7:00. By 7:45, I was standing at the window thinking maybe they were pulling into the driveway quietly, wanting to surprise me. I thought I saw headlights. I even opened the door once, just the wind. I sat down at the table at 8:00 p.m. sharp, like a fool. And at 8:14, I saw the photo. I didn't even recognize the kitchen at first. It wasn't Rachel's. It wasn't James's. It was Alice's, my sister's. The one who had told me she was going out of town for Christmas. They were all there, and they looked happy. Effortlessly happy, like I had never existed. My grandchildren were wearing the matching sweaters I had knitted for them last year. My son's wife, who'd always said she didn't eat gluten, was laughing over a plate of garlic bread. My sister was front and center, holding up a glass of wine. Eyes crinkled in a smile I hadn't seen in years. And I was tagged. Tagged. In the comments, someone had written, "Where's your mom?" No one answered. I sat there, the roast in front of me dry now, the gravy skinning over in the dish. I picked up my wine glass and put it back down. I couldn't drink. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think of a single reason to be sitting there. So I got up. I turned off the music, the same old holiday playlist we always listened to. I blew out the candles. I walked into the kitchen and started covering everything. Plastic wrap over pain. Tinfoil over betrayal. Then I sat down on the floor and pressed my back against the oven. The heat was still coming off it, and I stared at the wall, thinking, how did I get here? What did I do to deserve this? I raised them. I carried them. I buried my husband and still made sure Christmas never changed. I sacrificed. I gave. And now they'd erased me. Not with cruelty, not even with words, just with absence. The worst kind. My hand was still shaking when I reached for my phone again. I wanted to call. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I whispered, "Okay." It was the quietest I've ever sounded. But it was the moment everything changed. When they were young, they used to wake me up before dawn on Christmas morning. Not 1 year passed without one of them tiptoeing into my room whispering, "Mom, is it time yet?" I'd pretend to still be asleep just long enough to hear them squeal and run back down the hallway. Their father used to joke that I was the fourth child, how excited I'd get setting out stockings and labeling each tag in my best handwriting. But he didn't see the truth of it. Christmas was how I held us together, especially after he was gone. It gave the chaos a shape. It gave the pain a ritual. And I clung to it like a lifeline. We were never wealthy, but I made magic with what I had. 1 year, I turned old clothes into doll clothes for Rachel. I used leftover wood scraps to carve James a little train. Alice, my sister, she came every year like clockwork. She helped me cook. She brought wine. And when I couldn't afford the power bill, she brought candles, pretending it was a tradition and not a necessity. Those were the years I felt proudest. I made Christmas happen. I made it joyful even when I had no right to feel joy myself. I remember 1 year, I think Rachel was 13. She stood beside me in the kitchen and said, "You make the world feel safe, Mom." I didn't even know what to say. I just smiled and stirred the pot. I never told them what I gave up. That I sold my wedding ring to pay for the roof after a hailstorm. That I worked nights at the diner while they were asleep. That I skipped meals to keep the fridge stocked for them. They didn't know. They didn't need to. That's what being a mother was, 100 invisible sacrifices for people you'd die for in a heartbeat. And I never wanted them to feel the weight of that. Not then. When my husband passed a heart attack in his sleep, no warning, no goodbye. I remember standing at the funeral thinking, I'll have to do this alone now. And I did. I never remarried. Never dated, not really. There were men, a few polite dinners, one awkward kiss on New Year's Eve. But no one came close to what he was to me, and no one ever would. I focused everything on them. Their birthdays were always special, balloons, cakes, notes under pillows. I volunteered at their schools, knew every friend's name. I was the mom who drove the carpool, stayed late after PTA meetings, made costumes for school plays out of thrift store fabric and stubborn determination. I gave them everything I had, and then as they grew older, I gave them more. Helped Rachel with her down payment. Co-signed James's loan when he wanted to start that ridiculous juice bar that eventually failed. Helped Alice after her divorce, even though she moved into my guest room and nearly drank through my entire wine rack. Every act of giving felt like building something. A bridge, maybe, or a house, or a vault I believed they'd never forget. But slowly, quietly, something shifted, and I didn't see it. The first time Rachel forgot my birthday, I told myself she was just busy. The first time James brought his new girlfriend to Christmas without telling me, I told myself it was spontaneous. When Alice started rolling her eyes at my stories, interrupting me to correct some tiny detail about a memory I lived, and she barely survived, I laughed it off. I told myself I was overreacting. But that night, sitting on the kitchen floor with my phone in my lap, and their laughter still echoing from that photo, I saw it clearly for the first time. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had rewritten me. I was no longer the woman who raised them. I was now just extra. It hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. You think that when you give your life to someone, when you pour yourself into people, there will be some kind of echo. That love returns. That sacrifice becomes gratitude. But love isn't always returned. Sometimes it's just consumed. That realization settled into my bones like winter frost. I sat there for over an hour. At one point, I laughed and the sound startled me. It didn't sound like me, it sounded like someone else. Someone tired. At midnight, I stood up, cleaned the rest of the table. I didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried into my skin like salt. I put the leftovers in the fridge, even though I knew I'd throw them out in a few days. Habit, ritual, ghost reflex. Then I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed. I looked around the room I hadn't changed in 20 years. The same dresser, the same photo of my husband by the lamp, the same box of letters in the drawer, our letters. I opened that box and pulled one out at random. His handwriting, slanted quick but careful. You make everything feel like home he'd written once, long before the kids, long before the weight of years pressed down on us. I read that line over and over again. You make everything feel like home. And for the first time in a long time, I asked myself something I hadn't dared to. What happens when the home you built doesn't want you anymore? It didn't happen all at once. That's the worst part. If they had just turned on me overnight, maybe I could have blamed some specific moment. Something I said, something I did. But no. This was slower. Like rust on a garden gate. You don't notice it until it doesn't open anymore. I started seeing the signs maybe 2 years before that empty Christmas night. Rachel stopped calling weekly. We used to talk every Sunday afternoon while she cooked dinner. She said it helped her focus hearing my voice. But the calls became texts. Then the texts became silence. I told myself she was just overwhelmed. 3 kids, a stressful job. A husband who only remembered our anniversary because Facebook told him. James started acting strange after his juice bar failed. He didn't tell me until months after it closed. When I found out and called him, he brushed it off. It wasn't a big deal, Mom. You don't need to worry. But I do worry. I've always worried. That's my job. I offered him money just a little, and he snapped at me. You think money solves everything? That stunned me. Because that was never true. I offered help. I offered love. He heard judgment. And from that moment, things started shifting between us. He stopped stopping by. And Alice, oh, Alice, my sister was my shadow for decades. We were only 14 months apart. We survived our parents, our stupid first loves, even my husband's death together. I thought we were glued for life. But somewhere in the last few years, she turned cold. She started correcting me at family dinners. Subtle things at first. Actually, you didn't make that recipe I did. Or, you were never great at remembering details, were you? It always felt like a joke, until it didn't. Then she started skipping my calls. Refused to help plan Rachel's baby shower, said I was too controlling. It chipped away at me piece by piece. I started questioning myself. Did I become too much, too emotional, too needy? Maybe I called too often. Maybe I talked about the past too much. Maybe my house smelled too much like cinnamon and age. One evening, I invited them all over for dinner, just a casual Wednesday. I even made their favorites. Lasagna for Rachel, roasted carrots for James, apple crumble for Alice. Only Rachel showed up. Late. She sat at the table, barely touched her food, and said, "You know, not everything has to be a production." I blinked at her. I didn't even know what she meant. You always try so hard to recreate something. You need to let people breathe. That stuck with me for weeks. I was trying to recreate something. Was I suffocating them with tradition? Was my love a weight? I brought it up to Alice the next time she called, a short, obligatory conversation. Rachel said I make too much of things, I said. I remember laughing nervously. Do you think that's true? Her pause was longer than I expected. Well, she said you do get intense. You hold on too tight. Not everything needs to be how it used to be. I remember my heart slowing down in that moment. like it wanted to stop just long enough to give me space to feel that. Hold on, too tight. I thought about all the years I held them through nightmares, stomach bugs, heartbreaks, funerals. I thought about the way James clutched my hand during his graduation, the way Rachel sobbed into my lap after her first miscarriage, the way Alice used to fall asleep on my couch with a blanket I folded just for her. Was that holding on too tight, or was it just love that outlived its welcome? That fall, I stopped inviting them to casual dinners. I waited to see if they would reach out. For weeks, then months, Thanksgiving came. We had a tradition we'd meet at my house the night before, make pies together and play music too loud. That year, I got a single text. Doing Thanksgiving at Mark's family this year. Hope you understand. Love you. That was it. No call, no pie, no music. And then came Christmas. A week before I reached out anyway. Part of me still hoped. I'd love to host again this year. Made all your favorites? Same time as always. Let me know what to bring for the kids. Rachel responded 2 days later with a thumbs up emoji. Not even a word. A thumb. James never replied. Alice told me she'd be in Vermont, taking time for myself. So when I stood there on Christmas morning, baking, cleaning, folding napkins into swans, I told myself it wasn't about whether they showed up. It was about trying, holding space, keeping the door open. But the door stayed closed, and they smiled around someone else's table. And that's when I stopped believing I was the problem. Because if I had truly done something wrong, if I had hurt them, insulted them, betrayed them, wouldn't they tell me? Wouldn't they say it to my face? Wouldn't they fight, scream, argue, instead of fading me out like background noise? This wasn't a confrontation. This was an erasure. And I knew in that moment something had shifted too far to fix. But I didn't scream. I didn't call. I didn't beg. I began to listen. Watch. Remember. And slowly, I started making notes. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. They were writing a version of me that didn't match the woman I knew I was, and I wasn't going to let that version stand. I didn't say anything. Not after Christmas, not the day after or the week after. I sat in the quiet of that house and let the silence stretch. Let it breathe. Let it tell me what words couldn't. I went about my days like normal, or at least that's how it looked from the outside. Took my morning walks. Watered my succulents. Went to the library every Wednesday. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't reaching out anymore. I wasn't explaining myself. I wasn't pretending not to notice. I was listening and remembering and planning. I started with my journals. I've kept them for years, dozens of them in a cedar trunk upstairs, all lined in dated entries, grocery lists, doctor appointments, birthdays, recipes taped to the margins. But now I wrote differently. Now I documented. I wrote down every conversation I could recall from the past 2 years, the missed calls, the things that felt like slights, the subtle exclusions, the questions they didn't ask. I printed out that Facebook photo, the one from Christmas. I taped it inside the journal. Below it, I wrote, "This is what erasure looks like." Then I went through my phone. I scrolled through texts. I took screenshots. I noted the tone shifts, the half-hearted replies. James telling me he'd call later, and never did. Rachel sending me pictures of the kids, but never asking how I was. Alice ghosting me after I invited her to the fall festival we used to love. I started to feel like a detective in my own life, trying to piece together a disappearance, except the person who vanished was me. But here's the truth I uncovered slowly and without emotion. They were never going to notice. Not unless I made them. Not unless I gave them a reason to stop. Because people get used to what you allow. They grow accustomed to you always forgiving, always reaching out, always waiting at the door. So I stopped. I didn't block them. I didn't delete anything. I just let the thread unravel. I wanted to see how far it would go before they realized I wasn't chasing anymore. 2 weeks passed. No calls, no check-ins. I didn't even get a Happy New Year message, not even from Rachel, who had never missed one in her life. But that wasn't what broke me. It was finding the old letters. They were buried in the back of my closet, tucked inside a shoebox that smelled like cedar and thyme. Letters from my husband written in ink that had started to fade, but never lost its warmth. Some were silly, some romantic, some dated before we were even married. But one stopped me cold. It was written just weeks before he died. A letter I don't remember ever reading, or maybe I just wasn't ready to hear it then. In it, he said, "If anything ever happens to me, don't give all of yourself away. Love the kids, raise them well, but don't vanish into being their mother. Keep something for yourself, because one day they'll grow up and you'll still be here. Don't forget that you're allowed to want more." I read that line 5 times. You're allowed to want more. And I realized I didn't even know what that meant anymore. So I started small. I cleaned out the attic, got rid of old boxes, dusty decorations, broken ornaments from holidays long gone. I made 3 piles: keep, donate, let go. It felt like peeling off layers of a life I'd wrapped too tightly around me. I opened windows I hadn't opened in years, rearranged furniture, changed out curtains, lit candles just for myself. But the most important thing I did was schedule a meeting with my lawyer, not for drama, not out of spite, but because I had spent my entire adult life structuring everything around my children. My will, my trust, my emergency contact, every document tied back to them, every medical file, every retirement note, all roads led to Rachel James or Alice. And now, I wasn't sure they even saw me as real. So I changed the structure. I didn't disown them. I'm not that petty. But I rewrote everything with clarity. I created a stipulation. If I passed unexpectedly, each of them would receive a sealed letter. Handwritten by me. No lawyers, no bitterness, just truth. Each letter would contain something different: a memory, a list of things I had done for them, things they may have forgotten, a photograph, a moment, my version of our story, and one final sentence in all of them. You had a home in me. I hope one day you understand what that meant. I also made some changes to the trust. I created a clause that would donate a significant portion to a charity for women over 50 starting over. I remembered how scared I'd been when my husband died, how invisible I felt. I wanted other women to have options, strength, a voice. I walked out of that lawyer's office feeling taller, lighter, not vindicated, just awake. They had left me out of one dinner, but I had let them leave me out of so much more. And now, I wasn't waiting for an invitation anymore. I was writing my own story. And even if they never read it, they were already part of the ending. It was 3 months after that Christmas when I stood in front of the safety deposit box at Mid-First Bank, with my lawyer beside me, papers in hand, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The marble floors echoed every step. I remember thinking how cold and clinical everything felt, but it also felt honest, real. No holiday decorations, no false cheer, just truth printed on official documents. I had the trust rewritten that day. Every clause combed through, every outdated assumption removed. The house, still in my name, was no longer divided 3 ways. It was placed into a living trust, one that would be directed toward women in crisis. I chose a name for it: Marigold House. My husband always said marigolds reminded him of me, tough, warm, resilient, but never fragile. The idea had been forming in me slowly since reading his letter. That line, "don't vanish into being their mother," kept echoing. I had vanished, not all at once, but across 1,000 small acts of devotion that went unseen. I gave them everything, and somewhere in that giving, I forgot how to keep anything for myself. But now I had a plan, and plans, real ones, sharp ones, gave me something I hadn't had in years: power. Quiet power. I worked methodically. I consulted with my estate manager, reassigned the executor of my will to a woman I trusted from my book club, Sheila Kind and Sharp, a retired accountant who didn't sugarcoat anything. I paid off the house, paid off every remaining bill. Then I set up a schedule. Every month I would write a letter to each of them, not to be mailed, not now, but to be stored. Waiting. Just like I had waited. In the letters, I didn't accuse. I didn't blame. I told stories, reminded them who I was. I wrote about the time Rachel had the flu, and I stayed up for 3 days, feeding her ice chips and wiping her forehead. I wrote about James and his broken arm at 9 years old, how he cried until I told him he was brave, and then he didn't cry again. I wrote about Alice's panic attack in the grocery store after her divorce, and how we sat on the floor next to the cereal aisle until she could breathe again. One memory at a time. I dated each envelope, one per month, and I made sure each ended with the same phrase: "I never left you. You just stopped seeing me." I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. There was no confrontation, no cold calls or dramatic letters. I answered their few texts politely. I kept everything surface level. I watched Rachel post about PTA meetings and wine nights. I saw James share quotes about failure and growth. Alice uploaded vacation photos with a new group of friends, people I'd never seen before. They had full lives, and I watched them from a distance, a polite, invisible orbit. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was building something. By spring, I'd hired a contractor to renovate the basement into a small studio space, a future office for Marigold House. I met with local charities, started asking questions. Who helps women over 50 when they lose everything? What resources are there for people like me, widowed, forgotten, still breathing? One day, I met a woman named Lorraine at a community workshop. 62. Recently divorced after 39 years. Her husband left her for a 28-year-old yoga instructor. She had no income, no retirement, no friends left. I brought her coffee, listened. She cried when I told her I was starting something, a safe place. She said, "Do you really think people care about women like us?" I said they will. And I meant it. In May, I threw a birthday party for myself. I didn't invite family. I invited Lorraine, Sheila, my friend Dolores from water aerobics, a young woman named Nina I met at the DMV who was working 3 jobs and still smiled like life hadn't kicked her down. We ate lemon cake, drank white wine, laughed until our ribs ached. That night, I stood in my own kitchen and realized something. This was the first time in over 20 years that I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone. I wasn't wondering if someone would show up late. I wasn't checking my phone. I was fully there, in my skin, in my breath. I didn't need to be needed anymore. But I knew they would come back. Not out of guilt. Not out of love, but because life has a way of circling back when it needs comfort. And when they did, I would be ready, not to punish, not to gloat, but to show them who I really was. Not a fixture, not a servant, not the background hum of holidays, but a woman, a builder, a presence. And I would do it without a raised voice, without a pointed finger. Because sometimes the quietest revenge is refusing to disappear. It was the end of summer when I got the first call. Rachel. Her voice sounded cracked, not like crying, more like worn down. She didn't even start with a greeting. "Just launched into it, Mom. Do you have a minute?" I said yes, even though I was on my way out the door. I remember standing in the hallway with my keys in hand and my sandals half on, not moving. She said, "It's Ethan. He's been acting out. Like, really acting out. At school. At home." I said, "I'm sorry to hear that." Silence stretched on the line. She was waiting for more. I gave her more. "What happened?" And she told me tantrums, screaming, biting another child. Then she said it. "He keeps asking why we didn't see you on Christmas." That stopped me. "I thought you told him I was sick," I said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I did, but he doesn't believe me. He says you wouldn't lie." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She filled the silence with nervous words. "I think maybe I made a mistake." We all did. That was the first crack. The first sign that maybe the choices I made had reached them after all. But I didn't invite her over. I didn't say, "Let's talk." I said I hoped Ethan's okay, and I meant it. Then I said, "I'm heading to a meeting. Call me again sometime." A week later, James showed up. No warning, no text. Just knocked on my door at noon while I was cleaning out the garage. He looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles under his eyes, a pale sweat on his forehead. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Do you have a minute?" The same phrase. Always that phrase. I led him inside, offered him water. He didn't drink it. Just sat on the edge of the couch like a teenager waiting for a scolding. "I lost the apartment," he said. "The last investment didn't go through." He avoided my eyes. "We've been sleeping in hotels. Andrea's gone to stay with her mother." He paused. "We need help." I stared at him for a moment and felt something shift. Not resentment, not satisfaction. Just space between who he used to be and who I used to be. What kind of help, I asked. He swallowed. "Just money, a little, until I can get back on my feet." I nodded. "I'll think about it," I said. He blinked. "You'll think about it?" I smiled gently. That's what I said. He left not long after. I didn't write a check. I didn't lecture him. I didn't remind him of the thousands I'd already given when the juice bar crumbled. I just held my boundary like a person who finally saw herself clearly. Then came Alice. Of all of them, I thought she'd never come back. Too proud, too self-righteous. But one morning in October, she called. Her voice was flat, distant. "It's the house," she said. "We had a small fire in the garage. Smoke damage. Insurance won't cover it. They're saying I was negligent." I didn't ask questions. I knew she was. She always left candles burning. I remember warning her about that over and over. I said, "Are you safe?" She sighed. "We're in a motel. It's not great. I just—" Her voice broke for half a second. "I needed to hear your voice." I sat in my reading chair, holding the phone to my ear. Outside, the wind was blowing through the marigolds I'd planted along the fence line. Bright, defiant, alive. "I'm glad you called," I told her. She didn't ask for money. Not yet. But it was there, the unspoken need. They all needed something. And for the first time, I wasn't the one reaching out with open arms. I wasn't baking casseroles and writing checks and saying, "Don't worry, I've got you." Because the truth is, I had them. For years. Always. And when I needed them just once, they gave me silence. So now, I was offering the same. Not cruelty, just distance. A mirror held up to their choices. Weeks passed. Rachel called again. Said she and the kids wanted to stop by. I said I was busy. James texted to ask if we could talk over lunch. I said maybe next week. Alice left a voicemail about needing to clear the air. I didn't respond, because what none of them understood, what they'd never understood, was that I wasn't punishing them. I wasn't playing games. I was living. And in that life, they no longer had free access to me. But the world has its way of pushing people toward reckoning. By late fall, I started hearing from others. Their friends, their coworkers. People who'd seen how they treated me. People who had questions. You and your daughter, okay? Your son seemed off lately. Alice said you're not speaking, but she looked shaken when she said it. Guilt has a scent. It trails after people like stale perfume. And I was blooming. The Marigold house had taken off faster than I expected. I had 5 women living in the temporary housing wing, women rebuilding, surviving. Every night we shared dinner at a long table I decorated with candles and hand-sewn runners. Just like I used to. But this time, they noticed. They saw. They said thank you. They washed dishes. They asked me how I was, and that more than anything told me I'd made the right choice. My family was unraveling, and they were beginning to realize the one thread they pulled too hard was the one that had been holding everything together. It was just after the first snowfall when I invited them back. Not out of obligation, not for reconciliation, but for closure. I sent one message in the family group chat, the same thread they'd let collect dust for a year. Christmas Eve. My house. Dinner at 6. I didn't ask if they were coming. I didn't follow up. I didn't send reminders. I simply waited, and to my quiet surprise, they came, one by one. First Rachel, who arrived with her 3 kids all bundled in coats that looked too thin for the cold. She stood on the porch like she didn't quite believe she'd be allowed in. Then James, walking slower than I remembered. His shoulders hunched, his eyes flicking toward the house, like it might vanish if he stared too hard. Alice came last 10 minutes late, wearing a scarf I'd knit her 5 years ago and hadn't seen since. I didn't smile when I opened the door. I didn't frown either. I just stepped aside and said, "Shoes off, please." My voice was calm, even. The table was set but not extravagant. No folded napkin swans, no place cards. No glittering centerpieces or hand-tied bows on every chair like I used to do. Just simple plates, a casserole, a bowl of green beans, a small ham, warm bread. They noticed. The quiet, the lack of sparkle. Rachel looked around. "Where's the music?" she asked. I shrugged. Didn't feel like it. James tried to joke. "No matching pajamas this year." I said nothing. Just poured water into glasses. We sat, ate, mostly in silence. The kids whispered between bites. No one reached for seconds. Halfway through the meal, I stood, walked to the buffet, picked up the frame, turned around, and placed it gently at the center of the table. The photo. Christmas night, the year before, all of them. Around Alice's table, smiling, together, without me. No one said a word, not for 10 full seconds. Then Rachel set down her fork with a soft clink. Her mouth opened, then closed. James looked down at his lap. His knuckles went white. Alice exhaled slowly. "Mom?" I held up one hand, not in anger, just to pause them. "I only have one question," I said. 3 pairs of eyes met mine. No one moved, why Rachel broke first, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. I thought it would be easier. Easier than what I asked, than dealing with how sad everything felt. We didn't know how to make you happy anymore." James cut in. "It wasn't about hurting you. I swear. We were just lost. We thought maybe you needed space." "Did I ask for space?" "No," he admitted. "But we were scared. You always seemed so intense." I nodded once. "You mean I loved you too much?" Alice cleared her throat. "You made us feel guilty all the time, like we could never do enough to repay you." I looked at her. "Repay me, I didn't mean it like that." "But you said it." They squirmed, avoided my gaze. I sat back down, folded my hands in my lap. The frame remained in the center of the table untouched. Rachel whispered, "I've thought about that night every day. Ethan still asks about you. He cried when I told him we weren't seeing you anymore." I didn't have an answer for him. James said I lost everything this year, and the only person I wanted to call was you, but I thought you'd hate me. "I don't hate you," I said. "I just stopped waiting." Alice looked angry for a second. "You changed the will, didn't you?" I didn't flinch. "Yes." Rachel looked shocked. "You did? I did. And I'm not ashamed of it." James muttered. "Why didn't you tell us?" I tilted my head. "Why would I?" "You didn't tell me about the dinner." Silence again. Longer this time. Then Rachel said, "I'm sorry. Truly. I let other people's voices get in my head. I thought I was doing what was best for my kids, but I think I just didn't want to face how much I'd hurt you already." James said I messed up. "I know I did. I've been a disaster. But you didn't deserve to be cut out. None of this was fair to you." Alice sat back in her chair. "You always made everything perfect. Every year. Every time. And I resented you for it. Because it reminded me I never could. That surprised me. I never asked you to match me. I know," she said. "But I made it a competition anyway. And I lost. So I turned the kids against you. I said things I shouldn't have." There it was. The confession. I took a breath. Let it settle. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I said, "Thank you." That startled them. "Thank you," I repeated, "for finally telling me the truth. I wish it had come sooner. But I'll take truth late over lies on time." Rachel reached across the table. "Can we fix this?" I looked at her hand, then at James, then Alice. "You can try," I said, "but fixing something means you stay when it gets uncomfortable. No more disappearing. No more pretending. You show up, or you don't. But I'm not chasing anymore." James nodded. "We'll show up. I've heard that before," I said. Alice whispered, "I'll prove it." I gave a small smile. "The first one of the night. Then let's eat before the ham goes cold again. And for the first time in over a year." We finished a meal together, not with joy, not with ease, but with honesty. And sometimes that's the first real gift. The morning after that dinner, I sat in the same chair where I'd once collapsed with grief. Same view of the table, same faint light slipping through the curtains. But this time, it was different. I was calm. Not happy, not yet, but steady. Like the ground had finally stopped shaking under me. The dishes from the night before were already washed, dried, stacked neatly. Not because I had to, but because it felt good. After they left, none of them lingered. There were no hugs, no promises, just quiet exits. But I saw something in their eyes. Regret, yes, but also fear. Fear that they'd done something they couldn't undo, that I'd moved on without them, and worse, that I was doing just fine. I was. I made tea, sat in my robe, looked out at the marigolds by the fence, brown and shriveled from frost, but still standing tall. And I felt it for the first time, not revenge, not pride, just peace. The kind you get when the storm has passed and you're still alive. I didn't need anything from them anymore. Not apologies, not recognition, not even time. I had taken that first hard step months ago, the one where I chose myself. And now, every breath came easier. Over the next few weeks, things were odd. Rachel sent texts, little ones, photos of the kids baking cookies, a video of Ethan saying, "Tell Grandma hi." I responded politely. I didn't initiate. I didn't get drawn into long threads. I didn't offer suggestions or gifts, just simple responses. "Looks lovely. He's getting so big." James called once. Wanted to update me on a job interview. I said I hoped it went well. He asked if I'd like to have coffee sometime. I told him I was busy this week, which I was. Marigold House had taken up more of my time than I expected. But I didn't apologize. He said he understood, and he did. I could hear it in his tone. Something new, something careful. Alice sent a letter, a real one, on paper. 5 pages. She poured it all out, the jealousy, the pride, the hurt she carried that she never admitted. She said I blamed you for making me feel small, but you never did. You just kept being big, and I didn't know how to handle that. I read it twice, then once more a few days later, and I wrote back. 1 page. Simple. Thank you. I forgive you. That doesn't mean things go back, but it means I'm not carrying the weight of your silence anymore. The strangest part was how much lighter I felt after sending it. For so long, I thought forgiveness had to feel like a warm embrace. But it doesn't. Sometimes it just feels like setting down a heavy box you didn't realize you were carrying. The new year came, and with it, a letter from the state. Marigold House had been approved for expanded funding. We were officially registered as a nonprofit. I stood in the middle of the kitchen holding that letter, and I started crying. Not the bitter, broken sobs of the year before, but slow, grateful tears. This was mine. Built from pain, but not about pain. It was about possibility. One of the women who'd stayed with us, Teresa, stopped me on her way out the door one morning. She'd found a job. She'd found a room of her own. She hugged me tight and said, "You reminded me I'm not disposable." And that hit me harder than anything my children had said. Because that's what I'd felt like, discarded. Set aside. But now, I was a place people ran toward, not away from. Spring came. The marigolds bloomed early. I planted new rows, hosted tea in the garden for the residents, started a weekly story circle where women could share memories without judgment. We laughed. We cried. We healed slowly like frost melting from a window pane. Rachel showed up in April, unannounced, alone. She knocked on the back door like she used to when she was a teenager sneaking out to smoke clove cigarettes with her friends. I opened it, and she stood there holding a pie. Lemon meringue. My favorite. "I didn't come to make a scene," she said. "I just wanted to bring something. You don't have to invite me in." I stepped aside. She walked into the kitchen, looked around. "It's different," she said. "I'm different," I replied. She nodded. "I can see that." We sat in silence for a while. She didn't push. I didn't perform. Then she whispered, "I'm not asking you to forget. I just don't want to lose what's left." I looked her in the eye and said, "You already did. But you might earn something new." She cried quietly, not the loud, dramatic tears, just 2 steady trails down her cheeks. "I'll earn it," she said. And I believed her, not because of the pie, not because she showed up, but because for once she didn't try to control the moment. She just showed up. And sometimes that's enough to start over. The letters sat in the cedar box at the foot of my bed. 33 in total. 1 for every month since that night I realized they'd eaten without me. Each one dated, signed, sealed. I hadn't planned on giving them out yet. Not until the end, or unless the day came when words would speak louder from paper than from my mouth. But something changed after Rachel's visit. Something small, subtle, like the house breathed a little deeper when she left. It wasn't closure, but it was an opening. A door unlocked, and I could feel the past shifting, not erasing itself, just softening. A week later, I took the letters out. 3 thick envelopes, 1 for each. I held them in my hands for a long time, fingers tracing the edges. I didn't reread them. I didn't edit. I trusted the woman who had written them, the version of me who was in the thick of pain, but still wrote with grace. She deserved to be heard. I mailed them. No text, no warning, no clever note attached. Just 3 envelopes delivered to 3 people who once believed they knew everything about me. They each received them within 2 days. Rachel called first. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. She left a long message, 5 minutes of breath sniffles whispered. I didn't remember that, and I'm sorry I forgot, and I should have seen it. She ended with, "You deserved so much better than the way we rewrote you." James showed up the next day. He didn't come inside, just left a note taped to my front door. I found it after my morning walk. It said I read every word twice. "You were never intense. You were steady. And I let you carry everything. I hope you'll let me carry some of it now." Alice's response took longer. I didn't expect a dramatic gesture, not from her. But 3 weeks later, I received a package. Inside was a photo album. I opened it slowly, page by page. Childhood pictures, all of us. Old birthdays, family trips, school plays, moments I had thought were lost to time. On the first page was a handwritten note, "You built this life." I just took credit for it. I remember now. I'm sorry. And there, tucked behind the last photo, was something else. A bracelet I thought I'd never see again, one our mother gave to Alice when she turned 16, one she swore she lost during her first move. I ran my fingers over the charm. Forgiveness doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It's quiet, cautious, a rustle in the trees before the wind shifts. That spring, they started coming around again, slowly, carefully. Rachel brought Ethan over on Saturdays. They'd help in the garden, pull weeds, plant herbs. She stopped apologizing every 5 minutes, started asking questions instead. How did you keep the marigolds alive in that hard soil? What was Dad like before I was born? Real questions. James offered to fix the back fence. I said no at first, then I said yes. He came with a toolbox and a look I hadn't seen in years, focused, grounded. He didn't ask for anything, just worked. We ate lunch on the porch afterward. Nothing fancy. Tomato sandwiches and iced tea. And it was enough. Alice started calling on Thursdays. Short conversations. She didn't try to make it right. She didn't expect me to either. We talked about books, movies, politics sometimes. We disagreed, laughed. And slowly, I felt the weight of that one photo that Christmas start to lift. Not erased, just placed in its proper context. A wound, not the whole story. At Marigold House, we held our first official fundraiser. Rachel came. She brought cookies. Ethan handed out flyers. James offered to help with the website. Alice wrote a speech. She didn't read it. She just handed it to me after the event. "You don't have to read it," she said. But I needed to write it. I read it that night, alone, in my chair by the fire. It was about family, loss, what it means to forget someone who never stopped remembering you. I wept, but not from grief, from release. One night in June, we sat around my kitchen table again. All of us. No matching napkins, no curated playlist, just paper plates, sandwiches, lemonade. The kids were on the floor playing cards. The sun was still hanging low behind the trees. Rachel said, "Do you remember that year we tried to make a gingerbread house and James ate the chimney?" We all laughed. James said, "I still say you glued it together wrong." I smiled. "You just didn't want it to stand. You wanted an excuse to eat it." Even Alice laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not a forced one, but soft, like she was remembering too. We were different now, not perfect, not healed in every corner, but changed, and I realized sitting there, I didn't want it to go back to how it used to be. This was better. This was honest. We weren't pretending. We were finally, after everything, being real. It was a late summer afternoon when the knock came again. This time, it was James. He had paint on his shirt, and something in his eyes that told me he wasn't just here to fix another fence or mow the lawn. He stood there a little taller than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing him more clearly now. "Can I sit?" he asked. I nodded and stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, no coffee, no snacks, just stillness. He rested his hands on the table, palms down, and looked straight ahead. "I need to apologize," he said, "not just for Christmas. For all of it." I didn't say anything. He needed the silence. I think for a long time he continued. "I didn't want to see how much you were doing. I wanted to believe you were just being extra, controlling, overbearing." He paused. "But the truth is, you were holding the whole thing together. All those years you made sure we felt safe. You gave up so much." I didn't get it. I didn't want to get it. He shifted in his seat. "When I started failing with the business with Andrea, I felt so ashamed. And shame does something to people. Makes you mean. Makes you run. I blamed you because I thought if I could blame you, I wouldn't have to blame myself. Still, I said nothing. I let him keep going. I read your letter," he said. "The part where you said you used to skip meals so we'd have enough? I didn't know that. I was a kid, I get that. But I didn't even ask. Not once." His voice cracked. "I'm 38, and I don't think I ever asked how you were doing." I reached over, placed my hand on top of his. "You're asking now." He broke, the kind of cry men are taught to avoid. Shoulders trembling, mouth open, tears silent. I didn't rush to comfort him. I let it happen. He needed it. When he could breathe again, he whispered, "Do you forgive me?" And I said yes. Not because I forgot, but because I finally understood forgiveness isn't about excusing pain. It's about refusing to carry it alone anymore. Later that evening, Rachel called. She wanted to plan something a family dinner at her house this time. She was nervous, awkward. "I know it might feel strange," she said, "but I want to show you. I remember what you taught me. I want to do it right." I didn't say yes right away. I asked her why now, and she said, "Because I want my children to understand what love looks like when it keeps going, even after it's been dropped." So I went, and it was strange at first. Seeing them all in a space that wasn't mine, eating from plates, I didn't set watching someone else take charge of the night. But then Rachel pulled out her phone and played an old video, a home movie from a Christmas when they were small. My voice filled the room, warm and laughing. The camera panned across 3 tiny faces in matching pajamas. James was shouting about a toy he couldn't open. Rachel was already halfway through unwrapping her second gift. Alice was laughing in the background, holding up a mug that said "World's Okayest Aunt." And in the middle of it all, me, standing there, present, whole. It hit me in a way I didn't expect, that they did have those memories, that they hadn't erased me, they'd just let themselves forget for a while. We stayed up late that night. The kids fell asleep on the couch. Alice curled up in a chair with a blanket. James sat at the kitchen island refilling water glasses. Rachel leaned against the counter and said, "It's not perfect, but I'm glad we're trying." I nodded. Trying matters, and it did. Because trying means effort. Trying means seeing. Trying means they were no longer pretending I was invincible or invisible. A week later, I got a card in the mail. From Alice. Just one sentence. "You were always the roots even when we forgot the tree." I pinned it to my corkboard. Right above the first letter I'd written after that Christmas. The one I never mailed. The one that said, "I am not angry. I'm just not going to shrink anymore." And I hadn't. I'd let go of the shrinking, of the pretending, of the soft yes to every ask. I found new rituals, Sunday walks, book readings at the shelter, movie nights at Marigold House where we all curled up with popcorn and cried over films we'd never admit we loved. And they, Rachel, James, Alice, they started showing up. Not perfectly, not every time. But they came. Not with demands, but with presence. And maybe that's what healing looks like. Not a big scene, not an apology drenched in tears and speeches. Just people returning with quieter hearts and open hands. I still had the letters, the rest of them. I hadn't decided what to do with those. Maybe they were meant to stay with me, a map of the pain I survived. Or maybe someday I'd pass them along to someone else who needed proof that healing wasn't a myth. But for now, they were a reminder not of the betrayal, but of the rebuilding. By the time autumn returned, I had let go of so much that the house itself felt different. Lighter. Like it no longer carried echoes I hadn't chosen. I replaced the heavy drapes with gauze ones let more light in. The hallway where their childhood photos once hung was now covered in art from Marigold House residents, vibrant colors, uncertain brushstrokes, honest work. Sometimes I'd stand in front of them with a cup of tea and think this is what survival looks like when it's turned into beauty. It had been almost 2 full years since the Christmas they left me behind, and yet I no longer felt abandoned. That version of me sitting alone beside a table no one came to, she still existed tucked in the folds of memory, but she no longer defined me. She had passed through the fire and come out whole. Not untouched, but whole. Rachel came by more often now. She brought the kids without prompting. They no longer asked where I'd been, they simply hugged me like I'd always been there. And maybe that's the best kind of healing, when children pick up where love left off, without needing every bruise explained. James was working again. Small jobs starting slow, but steady. He offered to help at the shelter once a month, teaching budgeting classes. I figured it's the least I can do, he said. I've made every mistake they've made. Might as well turn that into something useful. He still stumbled over apologies, but his actions were louder than any words. And Alice, she surprised me. More than once. She started volunteering every Thursday night. At first, she said it was just to keep busy, but I knew better. She brought homemade cookies, sat with women younger than us, and listened to their stories like someone who had only recently learned how to hear. One night, I caught her helping one of them write a letter to her estranged daughter. Alice's voice cracked when she said, "Write it like she'll read it one day." Even if she doesn't. I didn't interrupt. I just walked away, holding the truth like a quiet gift. And somewhere between those nights of shared stories and the ordinary days of morning walks and marigold pruning, I began to understand what legacy truly meant. It wasn't property. It wasn't the house. It wasn't what I left in a will. It was presence. It was showing up after the fire, choosing to stay, not just for others, but for myself. That fall, we held our first Marigold reunion. Former residents, volunteers, friends. Rachel helped organize it, James grilled, Alice handled the name tags. We lined the yard with folding tables and pumpkins. Nothing fancy, just honest warmth. Toward the end of the night, Rachel stood beside me and said, "I thought your legacy would be our family. But I see now, your legacy is so much bigger than us." I looked at her. "Family doesn't have to be small," I said. "Sometimes it grows beyond the walls you built it in." She nodded, wiped her eyes. "You deserved better from us." And I replied, "I got better. Just later. We didn't need to say more." James joined us holding 2 cups of cider. He handed one to me, grinned. "This is all you know, all these people, all this hope. You built this from pain." "That's alchemy, Mom." I laughed. "No, that's just what women do." Alice stood nearby watching. For once, she didn't look like she needed to prove anything. She looked content. And in that stillness, I saw the sister I remembered, the one who used to braid my hair on the porch when we were little, humming off-key and telling me I'd always be stronger than I knew. Later that night, after the guests left and the dishes were stacked and the porch lights turned off, I sat in my chair with one final letter in my hand. Not for Rachel, not for James, not for Alice. For me. I wrote, "You didn't vanish. You transformed. You let them forget, and then you reminded them gently. Not with force, not with rage, but with the strength of staying. And that is your power." I sealed it, dated it, placed it at the top of the cedar box. Because I wanted a reminder, even for myself, that redemption doesn't always wear the clothes we expect. Sometimes it looks like casseroles and paper plates. Sometimes it looks like a sister folding laundry beside strangers. Sometimes it looks like your grown son nailing a crooked fence straight. And sometimes it looks like silence, the kind that isn't empty, but finally full. That Christmas was quiet. Not in the way that used to ache, not like that first night, where silence sat like a weight on my chest. This silence was gentle, earned. I woke early before the sun rose and lit a single candle in the kitchen. The house smelled of cinnamon again, but not because I was trying to recreate anything. I just liked the smell. I made a small breakfast. Just eggs, toast, a cup of coffee with cream. No need for excess anymore. The table wasn't set for a dozen. There were no gifts under a tree. Just one envelope in the center of the table, a note for myself. It said, "You did it. You stayed soft. Even when they left, even when it hurt. And now they see you again." They were coming later. Rachel and her kids, James, Alice. No big dinner, no pageantry, just presents. At 10 a.m., Rachel knocked. Not like a daughter returning to a mother she owed, but like someone coming home. She brought a pie pecan this time. "You said you missed the old recipe," she told me. "I found it in your handwriting, taped to a box in my garage." The kids ran inside like they belonged. And they did. They always had. James showed up a little after noon holding 2 bags of groceries. "I figured we'd make lunch together," he said. "Not everything has to be prepared ahead of time." I smiled. "You're learning." He grinned. "You're teaching." Alice came last, as usual. But she brought something unexpected. A dusty box I hadn't seen in decades, full of old VHS tapes. "I found these in storage," she said. "I thought maybe we could watch some." We did. And for the first time in years, I saw myself, not the woman I'd written into all those letters, not the mother, or the caretaker, or the provider, but me, laughing, twirling in a robe, holding a toddler on my hip while making pancakes, singing badly into a spoon. Rachel put her hand on mine during one video. "I forgot how much fun you were." I said I didn't. Lunch was simple. Roasted vegetables, baked chicken, homemade biscuits that didn't rise quite right. No one cared. We ate, talked, remembered. There were no speeches, no apologies. Not anymore. Those had been said. What remained was quieter, richer. Ethan sat beside me and asked, "Grandma, did you ever get mad that we weren't here before?" I looked at him and said I was sad. But not mad. People forget sometimes. But if they come back with love, that matters more than staying away in shame. He nodded, like that made perfect sense. "I'm glad we came back." "Me too," I said. After lunch, we went outside. The snow had started to fall, light flakes drifting like feathers. Rachel and Alice sat on the porch with mugs of tea. James chased the kids around the yard. I watched them. Not as someone trying to hold on. Not as someone desperate to be seen. Just someone present. Someone at peace. And I realized something in that moment not all stories end with a grand finale. Some just settle into a quiet rhythm, a home you return to, a person who never stopped keeping the door unlocked. That night, I sat in my bedroom wrapped in the same old blanket I used to curl up in while waiting for them to call. And I thought maybe the hardest part wasn't being left behind. Maybe the hardest part was learning to stay still long enough to be found again. And I had. They'd come back, not to the woman they expected me to be, but to the woman I'd become. And for the first time in many, many years, I didn't need anything more than that. I woke early that morning with a strange feeling in my chest. Not dread, not worry, just stillness. The kind that feels like closure, like the end of a long conversation that finally landed where it needed to. I sat up, stretched my arms, and let the light pour through the gauze curtains I'd come to love. Outside, the frost on the marigolds had finally given way to dew. I stood, pulled on my robe, and moved through the house quietly. No music, no television, just the soft rhythm of floorboards under my feet. There were no plans that day, no visits scheduled, no appointments, no meetings, and that somehow felt like a gift. A final page without anyone rushing to fill it. I walked to the cedar chest, opened it one last time. The letters were all gone. Given, received, answered. Only one remained, the one I wrote to myself. I opened it again, read it slowly, then folded it back up, kissed the edge, and set it in the fireplace. Watched the flame curl it into ash. I didn't need it anymore. I carried the words inside me now. At noon, I made myself a cup of tea and walked out to the garden. The bench under the arbor was damp with morning air, so I laid a towel across it and sat. The breeze was soft, the birds quiet, and I let it all in. I thought about my husband, about that last letter he wrote me, the one that warned me not to disappear into motherhood. He'd been right. I had vanished for a while, but I came back. And not just back to them, back to myself. I thought about that Christmas night, the one that started this story. The roast untouched, the table too full for one, the silence that felt like punishment. And now how silence had become my peace, my power. They had tried to come back, and I let them. Not fully, not blindly, but I opened the door. Let them carry their own guilt. Let them rebuild something real, something fragile and honest. Not the brittle family story we once clung to, but a living thing. One that could bruise, but also bloom. That was enough. I didn't need apologies anymore. I didn't need gifts or phone calls on time or birthdays remembered exactly. What I needed was truth, presence, quiet love that didn't need to perform. And I had it. I walked through Marigold House later that day. The women were cleaning the community kitchen. Someone was laughing. Someone else was humming. I looked around at the building that had once just been an idea in my head, scrawled in a journal when I still couldn't sleep through the night. Now it was real. A place where forgotten women came to remember themselves. A place I had built. They called me Miss Claire. I never told them not to. It made me feel like someone more permanent. A fixture. I left my final letter that evening with Sheila the executor, labeled clearly. My wish is simple. Donate the house. Keep the foundation running. Let the rest fall where it may. I didn't care who inherited the photos or the old jewelry box. I cared that the table stayed in the dining room, that the garden stayed full, that the doors never locked to someone who just needed a place to sit and cry. By the time the sun had set, I had lit one candle in the kitchen. Just one. That night, I went to bed early, pulled the blankets up to my chin, closed my eyes with a long, steady breath, and that was it. I left gently, not in pain, not in bitterness, but as someone who knew finally completely that she had done the hardest thing. She had loved people who forgot her, and then she forgave them, before they even knew how much it mattered. She became a legacy no one could erase, and somewhere in the silence between memories and healing, she wrote the final line of her story with her own hand.